All right. Ooh, hello. There you go. We're in Exodus chapter 7. Actually, we'll start back in chapter 16. Exodus chapter 16, that's where we're starting this morning. Exodus chapter 16. We're on lesson 9 this week. We are studying Moses and the law. All right. If you had a book and lost a book, this is not for you yet, but if you have never had a book and you would like a book, please raise your hand. All right, here we go. Keep them up until Randy gets to you. There we go. You need a book. Okay, that's fine. But the book has all the lessons in them. Yes, sir. You can upgrade for free. We're not even going to charge you, Rodney. Better deal than Verizon right here. All right. Randy's just restocking here. All right. If you need a book, keep your hand up where he can see you. There you go. 1, 2, 3, and then Sister Sledge over here, if you don't mind. Oh, let me grab one from you. Uh-oh. Nope. There you go. Susanna, Rodney, hold off just, okay, Josh, you got it for Sister Sledge? Thank you. There we go. All right, that's everybody, I think. All right, good. All right. And Rodney, the handout that you had, what lesson did that go to? 12 or 13? 15. Okay, good. All right, very good. All right, Exodus chapter 16 is where we are. Last week we talked about Moses and his role in the exodus of the children of Israel from bondage under what nation? The Egyptians. That's right, okay. So now we have been liberated from Egyptian bondage. What is the hallmark moment that sets us apart from Egypt? Crossing the Red Sea. Okay, we have come over to the other side of the Red Sea. And just about the first thing that Israel's going to do is what? Complain. What are we going to complain about first? We have no water, and then we have no bread, and then we have no meat. And God's going to meet every one of those concerns. The water at the end of chapter 15 was bitter, and we get fresh water there by throwing the tree or the plant into the spring. God's going to give them bread from heaven. This is manna, very good. And then what is God going to give them for food? He's going to give them quail. And how much quail did he give them? More than they knew what to do with it, right? God kind of gives them a lesson there. You want quail? You're going to complain about this. You're going to doubt me. I'm going to give you quail. I'm going to give you quail up to your nostrils. You're going to be tired of quail by the time I'm done giving you quail. And God makes the point. And what point is God making in that? The law of diminishing returns. What other lesson is God giving them, Ryan? They just needed to what? They needed to trust him. Right? He's the one that had brought them out of Egypt. He's the one who has taken care of them all the way. He's going to continue to do that. And why is he going to continue to preserve this nation? Give me one singular reason why he is going to preserve this nation, and the nation can have confidence in that. There are promises that are still outstanding, right? Specifically the promise of the seed of Abraham, through which the whole world is going to be blessed. That hasn't been fulfilled yet. This nation is going to be preserved until that moment comes about. All right? And so he is taking care of them to this point. So we leave the Red Sea area and we are journeying now towards Mount Sinai. And we have a couple of episodes in between. We run into Moses' father-in-law by the name of Jethro. And in chapter 19, we are here at Mount Sinai. This is about 3 months after they have left Egypt. In the third month, chapter 19 and verse 1, after the sons of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on that very day they came into the wilderness of Sinai. When they set out from the Rephidim, they came to the wilderness of Sinai and camped in the wilderness, and there Israel camped in front of the mountain. And so we come here to Mount Sinai, and for a period of more than 40 days, it's actually going to look like more than 80 days. That is 80 days at a minimum. They are going to be stationed here at Mount Sinai. And what is going to be going on here at Mount Sinai? Yeah, the law is being given by God. Primarily, the law is being given by God to whom? To Moses, right? There is a little bit of an asterisk we can place beside that. But by and large, what is happening is Moses is getting the law from God. Now, describe to me, what does this process of Moses getting the law from God look like?
He makes several trips up and down the mountain.
Okay, Bruce, I'm glad you phrased it that way. You phrased it in a very interesting way. You said he makes several trips up and down the mountain. Why do you say that?
Because he goes up and talks to God, and then comes down and talks to the Israelites, then goes back to God, and comes back to the Israelites.
So we have this constant intercession. Moses is acting as an intercessor, as a mediator for the people, right? God has the law. Moses, to get the law, goes where? Up the mountain. He gets the law from God, and then what? Comes back down the mountain and does what? Gets disappointed. Comes down the mountain, shares the message with God, and then shares the message with the people, and then what? Rinse and repeat. We're back up the mountain. Follow this with me. Look at chapter 19 and verse 3. Chapter 19 and verse 3, what does Moses do? Goes up to God. So chapter 19 and verse 7, what does Moses do? He comes back down to whom? To the people. And at the end of verse 8, what does he do for the people? He brought back the words of the people to the Lord. That is, now he is going where? He's back up the mountain, isn't he? Look at chapter 19 and verse 14. Where is he now? Moses went down from the mountain. Chapter 19 and verse 20. Yeah, the Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. The very last verse in chapter 19, verse 25. Moses went back down to the people and told them. Are you seeing the pattern here? Going up to the mountain to do what? Get God's message. Coming down from the mountain and doing what? Sharing God's message with the people. Chapter 20 and verse 21. Moses approaches the thick cloud where God is. And he's going to be up here through the end of chapter 20, through chapter 21, through chapter 22, through chapter 23. He's up here the whole time. And in chapter 24, in verse 1, God, in giving all of these instructions to Moses, says, okay, now I want you and Nadab and Abihu and Aaron and 70 of the elders to come up. You're going to come up further than they are, Moses, but go and get them. So in verse 3, Moses does what? He goes down to the people and he shares this message. Moses came and recounted to the people all the words of the Lord. And then in verse 9, Moses does what? He goes back up, and he goes up with whom? Aaron and Nadab and Abihu and the 70 elders of Israel. And in verse 12, Moses, you come up closer so I can give you more instruction. So Moses goes up closer. And in verse 18, how long is Moses on the mountain this time? So 40 days. So we don't know a time frame for these previous visits, but this time, when Moses is called up further than Aaron and Nadab and Abihu and the 70 elders, this time Moses is up there for 40 days. He's getting instructions about the Ark of the Covenant, about the sanctuary, about the interior of the tabernacle. This is going to carry us all the way over through chapter 30. And in chapter 31 and verse 18, the last verse of chapter 31, capítulo 31, verso 18, when God had finished speaking with him upon Mount Sinai, he gave Moses the 2 tablets of the testimony, tablets of stone written by the finger of God. And then in chapter 32, beginning in verse 1, we get kind of this interlude, right? While Moses has been up here on the mountain for 40 days, what has gone on in the plain? Okay, we have had a delay. Moses has been up there for 40 days. And what's the scene like when Moses is up there? Thunder, lightning. It's a very intimidating scene. And so we're getting worried. Moses hasn't come back. So Aaron comes up with this plan. We're going to do what? We're going to take off our jewelry. We're going to put it into the oven, into the fire. We're going to mold it into the shape of a calf, and we're going to proclaim that this is your God, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. So while all of this is going on, God speaks to Moses in chapter 32 and verse 7 and says what? Go down, and go down immediately, because the people have done something foolish. And so in verse 15, verso 15, Moses turned and went down from the mountain with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand, tablets which were written on both sides, and they were written on one side and on the other. The tablets were God's work, and the writing was God's writing engraved on the tablets. Moses comes down, he sees what the people are doing in verse 19, and what does he do? He throws the tablets down, they break in pieces. Ultimately, he's going to grind them into powder and do what? Force the people to drink it, that's right. And then in verse 30, chapter 32 and verse 30, capítulo 32, verso 30. Now what? What is Moses doing? I'm going back up. I'm going back up to God. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin. Moses comes before God as an intercessor, as a mediator. God, I'm coming to you on behalf of these people. Verse 32, if you will, forgive their sin. If not, please blot me out from your book, what you have written. The Lord said to Moses, whoever has sinned against me, I will blot him out of my book. But now go and lead the people where I told you. So God says, okay, Moses, you've come up. Now I want you to go down again. Go down again and lead the people. In verse 4, when the people heard this, they're sad. They hadn't put on their ornaments. They're not ready. But eventually they're going to follow. God is going to reassure Moses at the end of chapter 33. He's going to place him in the cleft of the rock, let him see his glory passing by. And then he's called back up to the mountain one more time here in 4. What are we doing here in chapter 34? Yeah, we're replacing the tablets of stone, right? And so we cut out, this is chapter 34 and verse 4, capítulo 34, verso 4. He cut out 2 stone tablets like the former ones, and Moses rose up early in the morning and went up to Mount Sinai as the Lord commanded him, and he took the 2 stone tablets in his hand. And this time, verse 28, verso 28, how long is he here? He's here again for 40 days, that's right. And this time in verse 29, when he comes down from the mountain, he's got the 2 tablets, but what else is unique here? Yes, his face is radiating, right? He has been here in the presence of God. And now Moses is going to do what? He's going to do his part in leading the people, and hopefully leading the people where? To the promised land. Very good. All right. So, lest we kind of get this skewed picture of what this whole scene looks like, this is constant action here in the book of Exodus, isn't it? This is up the mountain, down the mountain, up the mountain, down the mountain, up the mountain, down the mountain, right? Moses is up, he's down, he's up, he's down. He's going up to get God's message. He's coming down to relay God's message to the people. And so this was thought question number one that you had. What might be the significance of Moses continually ascending and descending the mountain? What might that convey to the people? What might that convey to us? What are we learning when we're noticing Moses constantly going up and down the mountain? Obviously, there has to be something here, right? Otherwise, God just calls Moses up one time, gives him everything, and then down you go. Bruce, what you got?
I would say his loyalty to God and also his loyalty to the people as well.
Okay, we're seeing this equal, this concern for the things of God and concern for the people. Okay, Rachel?
It's like a physical representation of him interceding.
Okay, we are seeing a picture of what intercession, of what mediation actually looks like, right? David?
There's a separation between God and his people.
We see a difference between God and the people here, don't we? Moses is approaching a holy God. The people have demonstrated repeatedly God wants them to be a holy people. He wants them to be a kingdom of priests. Are they that yet? No, they're struggling mightily. And so we see this distinction in holiness. Here is Moses approaching the holy God and then coming back down and taking the message of the holy God to the people. Mike?
Not only did he make them drink that, 3,000 people were killed because he declared, which you're going to be on the Lord's side or you're not going to be on the Lord's
There's a
side.
plague, right?
And that gives us a little bit, Levitical priests were not some mealy-mouthy kind of, they were people that they killed 3,000 of their brethren.
Yeah.
They would not stand with the Lord at that time. So the severity of God to see, I think,
Okay.
and in back in chapter 20, he specifically said, do not make images of gold and silver, okay? That was part of what God had told Moses on the mountain back in chapter 20, not to do exactly like this,
Right.
not to make two golden calves, not to form this, and it just complete his disobedience.
Yep. Very good. Lynn, saw your hand up.
Well, outside intercessor, much like my righteous leadership. And compare that to Aaron.
Sure.
And what is mind-boggling to me is Aaron's place later on after doing all this.
Good point.
And the actions around both righteous and non-righteous leaders.
Right. There's a really good lesson here for us. I mean, do we understand on some level, do we understand what Aaron and the people might have been going through at that moment? God has brought you out. He's brought you to this awesome scene of this mountain that's covered in cloud. Moses, our leader, the one who has brought us out of Egypt by the power of God, has gone up to the top of this mountain. But what's going on at the top of this mountain veiled by a cloud? There's lightning flashing everywhere. There's thunder. I mean, we might well assume what's happened to Moses. Has God struck him dead? Right? And it's been how long? It's been 40 days and he hadn't come back. And so in our concern, in our anxiety, in our confusion, what's our answer?
Take things into our own hands.
Okay, take things into our own hands. And how, Rachel, did we take things into our own hands? This is chapter 32, right? Capítulo 32. How did we take things into our own hands?
To create something for them to worship. But what I always was misunderstood about is I thought it was something other, like they just created a physical representation of God.
Correct.
It wasn't some other God.
Correct.
It was like them acting out of ignorance of whatever they had known previously, forgetting to take into account what God.
So here's what we got. That's a good point. Look at, are you there in chapter 32? Look at chapter 32 and verse 4. Verso 4. They mold this calf, and then Aaron says what about it? Okay, this is your God, but this is your God that did what? Okay. So we're not creating a new God per se here. They're doing what?
Trying to create something that represents God.
They're making a tangible something that represented the God that brought them out of the land. Now, come back to Exodus 20. Éxodo capítulo 20. Exodus chapter 20. And let's see here. So here are our 10 commandments, right? And by the way, here's something that we may miss. I know I've missed times in my study before. What does chapter 19 and verse 25 say? Capítulo 19, verso 25. Moses went where, Ann? Down. And then as Moses is down in chapter 20 and verse 1, then what happens? God spoke these words. So here are the 10 commandments, and the 10 commandments are coming to the people how? Now this is different than the other ones, right? This is not coming in through Moses. This is coming in how? God speaking it. Moses is down with the people when this message comes. So that the first of these commandments, you shall what? Verse 3. No other gods before me. Okay. What would that, give me an example of no other gods before me. How might this commandment be violated? Who were some of the false gods that Israel ended up worshiping at some point that violated this commandment? Baal. The Asherah, right? False gods like that. Okay, very good. Next one. So no other gods before me. Next commandment. You shall not make for yourself an idol or any likeness of what is in heaven, above, or on the earth beneath, or in the water under the earth. You shall not worship them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the third and the fourth generation of those who hate me, but show loving kindness to thousands, to those who love me and who keep my commandments. So, commandment number 2 is don't have any what? Don't have any golden calves. Don't have any graven images, right? This is distinct from the first commandment. The first commandment is no other gods. Commandment number 2 is not no other gods. Commandment number 2 is what? You don't need to make anything that represents me and worship it as though it were me. But that's exactly what's going on where? In chapter 32. This is the thou shalt have no graven images. Okay. Lynn, yes, sir.
I think verse 20 of this same chapter gives us insight.
Yes.
I believe that this, let's just live for today and party, whatever attitude. Were they scared of God? I think they were scared of God, but they did not fear him. So if you look at verse 20, Moses said to the people, do not be afraid, for God has come in order to test you, in order that the fear of him may remain with you, so that you may not sin. And I think that applies to us today, too.
Sure it does.
Like there's a difference between being afraid and fear and obedience.
Go to the end of chapter 20 with me. Capítulo 20, verso 23. Exodus chapter 20 and verse 23. Instructions that Moses gets that he's going to carry down to the people. You shall not make other gods besides me. Now, if you're reading from a translation that indicates words that have been supplied by the translators, what words are supplied in verse 23? Other gods. So that's not a part of the text. We can leave that out and see if we get a little bit of a different sense. You shall not make besides me. Gods of silver or gods of gold you shall not make for yourselves. What did they do in chapter 32 and verse 4? Just exactly that, right? Didn't matter if it was a false god or a representation of the God who was in heaven. They weren't supposed to to do that. Keep reading, verse 24. If we're going to honor God, if we're going to worship God, if we're going to serve God in the manner that is acceptable, how are we to do that? Verse 34. You shall make an altar of earth for me. You shall sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your peace offerings, your sheep and your oxen, in every place where I cause my name to be remembered, I will come to you and bless you. If you make an altar of stone for me, you shall not build it of cut stones, for if you wield your tool upon it, you will profane it. And you shall not go up by steps to my altar, so that your nakedness will not be exposed on it. Did God lay out specifications for how he was to be approached and how he was to be worshiped? Yes, he did. But the problem is in chapter 32 and verse 4, what did they do? For fear, for anxiety, for whatever reason, they disregarded what God said. And what happens when we disregard what God says? There's sin, there's always trouble, there's always heartache. And that's the lesson they learned here. All right, let's get over here to our questions. Let's do question number 1. What future influential leader of Israel is mentioned alongside Moses in Exodus chapter 24? It's going to be Joshua, right? Joshua is going to be the next person who is, so to speak, going to take up the mantle of Moses. And what Moses fails to do, Joshua is going to succeed in that Joshua is going to lead the people where? He's going to lead them into the promised land. Moses famously is not going to get to enter the promised land, but Joshua is going to be one of the ones who leads God's people into the land. And when are we introduced to Joshua? Anyone remember? It's actually all the way back in chapter 17. Back in chapter 17, we're introduced to Joshua. And what role does Joshua have? He's Moses' assistant, right? He is the assistant of Moses. You see this thoughtful planning for future generations that we see here in the Old Testament. We see it in the New Testament as well with people like Timothy and John Mark and others. A concern for future generations and raising and training future leaders. In what chapter of Exodus do we read about the 10 Commandments? Yeah, Exodus 20. We were just there. That's right. What was written on the 2 tablets of stone that God gave Moses? The 10 Commandments. And you were supposed to provide a reference. Where did you figure that out from? 32:15-16. Okay, very good. Exodus 32. Anywhere else? Who said Deuteronomy 5? Was that you, Sister Bond? And that's what I got to. Deuteronomy chapter 5 and verse 22. These words the Lord spoke to all your assembly at the mountain from the midst of the fire, of the cloud, of the thick gloom with a great voice. He added no more. He wrote them on 2 tablets of stone, and he gave them to me. And what he had just described there in chapter 5 right before that were the 10 Commandments. And these were what God had written on the tablets. As Moses ascended the mountain to receive the law from God after the giving of the 10 Commandments, what was God's first commandment? So, come back to Exodus 20. Exodus 20, we get the 10 Commandments. And then after God gives the 10 Commandments in Exodus 20, what was the next regulation, the next ordinance that God is going to give to them concerning? What'd you say? Yeah, we're building the tabernacle. We're building the altar, right? These things, how God was going to be approached, how God was going to be worshipped, these regulations concerning the altar. Come over to chapter 28. What significant role is Aaron given from God here while Moses is on the mountain? Yeah, he's going to be given this role of high priest in Exodus chapter 28. We start to get these descriptions of this class of priests. Chapter 28 in verse 1, capítulo 28, verso 1. Then bring near to yourself Aaron your brother and his sons with him from among the sons of Israel to minister as priests to me. Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar, Aaron's sons. You shall make holy garments for Aaron your brother, for glory and for beauty. And so we get chapter 29, more instructions given about them, their role in chapter 29, the altar at which they will preside there in chapter 30. In chapter 31, instructions on how these things were going to be constructed. But here is the role that Aaron is given, the role of high priest. Mike.
I think Aaron's one of those characters in the Old Testament that we can look to that did some really bad things here. I mean, he didn't have the courage to stand up to the people, then he lied about the calves just coming out of the fire and all this stuff, and he failed miserably right here, okay, but he had redemption. He continued with the Lord. When Moses said, "Who's with us? Who's with God?" They said all the sons of Levi were with him. Well, I take it that would include Aaron, but I'm just saying he's an example of how even we can worship God so poorly or embrace false doctrines, but we can come to a point where we can be forgiven of this and we can be restored and we can be useful in God's kingdom.
God can bring beauty out of the ashes.
Exactly.
Sure, good point. All right. Let's get down to thought question number 2. Are Christians obligated to follow the 10 Commandments today? Yes or no, and explain your answer. No. Okay, who said no? Was that you, Todd? All right, Todd, you were bold enough to answer. Todd, why are Christians not obligated to follow the 10 Commandments today?
We're not under the law of Moses.
Okay. We're not under the law of Moses, all right? Why would you say we're not under the law of Moses?
Well, when Jesus came, he fulfilled the old law, ushered us into the new law.
Okay.
And I would say that some of the 10 Commandments are taught in the New Testament.
We've got some overlap.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. We got the, remember, is it called Venn diagram, is that right? Where you got the 2 circles that overlay each other, and we've got unique items here, but then we've got commonality in the middle, right? We've got some overlap between the law of Moses and the law of Christ, like we see that phrase used in the book of Galatians. How else might we, and Todd did a good job answering that, just absolutely fine. How else might we make the point that Christians are not under the law of Moses today? Pardon?
Worship on the first day of the week.
Okay, worship on the first day of the week as opposed to some of those Sabbath ordinances. Rod, you're chomping at the bit. You've got that wry smile on your face. What are you wanting to say?
The 10 Commandments were the heart of the covenant relationship that God entered into with the descendants of Israel. We are not descendants of Israel physically. We have a new covenant relationship with God. The old covenant was done away with.
Look at Exodus chapter 20, where we get these 10 Commandments, for instance. But before we get into the commandments, there's something very important that's mentioned in verse 2. We get the first commandment in verse 3, but before we get that first commandment, what does verse 2, capítulo 20, verso 2, Exodus chapter 20 and verse 2, what does this passage say? This is not a trick question. If someone would just like to read the passage, you get your check mark for the day and the gold star. It identifies who God's people are, right? I am the Lord your God who did what? I brought who? You out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. To whom are these laws given? To the nation, to the people, to the family that God brought out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Now, who's that? That's the Israelites. To whom does this covenant, to whom does this law go? It goes to the Israelites. And you and I, not being from the family that God brought out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, this law then does not apply to us. David?
Colossians 2:14.
Yes. Colossians 2:14 talks about the law and what God has done with the law through Christ. Colossians chapter 2 and in verse 14, He has canceled out the certificate of debt that consisted of decrees against us, which was hostile to us. He has taken it out of the way, having nailed it to his cross. Look at another New Testament passage. Look over here in the book of Hebrews. Look at the book of Hebrews with me. And yeah, chapter 7 is gonna be some of this, so is chapter 9. But yeah, let's look at chapter 7 and verse 11. Hebreos capítulo 7, verso 11. Hebrews chapter 7 and verse 11. Hebrew writer says this: if perfection was through the Levitical priesthood, and that's what's being described early on here in Exodus chapter 20 and forward, it's Levitical priesthood. Why is it called the Levitical priesthood, by the way? It's the priesthood through Levi, and Aaron notably was of whose household? Levi, and who was Levi? One of the 12 sons of Jacob. That's right. Okay. So, picking up verse 11, if perfection was through the Levitical priesthood, for on the basis of it the people have received the law, what further need was there for another priest to arise according to the order of Melchizedek? Remember, there's this promise, this Old Testament passage, you are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. There's that Old Testament promise as well. That's from Psalm 110. Okay, so if there is this outstanding promise of a priest, not according to the Levitical family, but according to the order of Melchizedek, then chapter 7 and verse 12, when the priesthood is changed, of necessity there is a change of law also. That is, the law of Moses said if you want to be a priest, you've got to come from which family? Levi. But if there is prophecy of a priest descending from a different order, a different family, then what does that tell you about the law? It's changed. So if you have a change in priesthood, then of necessity you have a change in law. Remember, that's a good way to remember what one of the key moments in Hebrews is all about. Change in priesthood means change in law. Okay? And that Jesus is called a priest according to the order of Melchizedek means that there has been a what? A change in the law. That the law of Moses has been taken away and that something better has been brought in. Keep reading in verse 13. For the one concerning whom these things are spoken belongs to another tribe. What tribe was Jesus from? Tribe of Judah, from which no one has officiated at the altar. For it is evident, verse 14, that our Lord was descended from Judah, a tribe with reference to which Moses spoke nothing concerning priests. And this is clearer still if another priest arises according to the likeness of Melchizedek, who has become such not on the basis of a law of physical requirement, but according to the power of an indestructible life. For it is witnessed of him, you are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. On the one hand, there is the setting aside of a former commandment because of its weakness and uselessness. And on the other hand, there is the bringing in of a better hope through which we draw near to God. Change in priesthood, change in the law. Go ahead, Brother Evans.
Perhaps the plainest passage on the point is 2 Corinthians 3, 7 through 11, which speaks specifically of the law written on tablets of stone. One point, if you're talking to a Sabbatarian, you'll try to say that it's just the stone tablets that have been done away, but the subject of the sentence is the law.
Absolutely.
Written on the stone tablet.
Very good. Good point.
2
Corinthians 3, 7 through 11. That's a good point. Number 3, we blew through this in a study we had not too long ago. We won't belabor this point. What do we learn about nakedness here in this text? We learned that nakedness was not to be exposed, right? That the priests were to wear linen breeches, God was concerned not only about the exposure of nakedness, but even incidental exposure of nakedness, over which we exercise control. And we learn lessons here about covering the leg, covering the thigh, and concepts like that. What is the contrast, question number 4, what is the contrast between Jesus and Moses in John chapter 1? What's the contrast between Jesus and Moses in John chapter 1? There you go. The law was given through Moses, but grace and what? Grace and truth come through Jesus. So what's the point here? Does that mean that no truth came through Moses? Does that mean there was no grace in the law of Moses? No. So what does it mean then? Pardon? Complete, right? That everything, all of this grace that was offered in the law of Moses was only offered because of whom? Because of Jesus. Look over here at Hebrews chapter 9 real quick. Look at Hebrews chapter 9. Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 13. Hebreos capítulo 9 verso 13. Hebrews 9 verse 13. If the blood of bulls and goats and the ashes of a heifer sprinkling those who have been defiled sanctify for the cleansing of flesh, how much more will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God, cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living God? That is, whose blood takes away sin? Blood of Jesus. Okay, now, verse 15. And for this reason, he is the mediator of what? Jesus is the mediator of a new covenant, in order that since a death has taken place for the redemption of the transgressions, when? For the redemption of the transgressions that were committed under the first covenant, those who have been called may receive the promise of the eternal inheritance. That is, was there forgiveness available under the law of Moses? During the time of the law of Moses, was there forgiveness? Yes. How did that forgiveness come? The only way forgiveness has ever come. Through the blood of Jesus. That's how then in John 1, John could say that grace and truth comes through Jesus. This is the completeness. There was grace under the law of Moses, but that grace was all based upon whose sacrifice? The sacrifice of Jesus. It looked forward to his sacrifice, and not, chapter 10, merely the blood of bulls and goats, which could not take away sin. Last question. Did God intend for the law of Moses to be his final revelation? That's kind of the question we've been circling here for a while. Did God intend the law of Moses to be his final revelation? You're shaking your head. Anyone going to be brave enough to say it? No, that's right. God did not intend the law of Moses to be his final revelation. How do we know that? I don't know, just felt good. There you go. That's Rod's passage from the book of Galatians that he taught us a while back. The law was our schoolmaster to bring us to Christ that we might be justified by faith, but after that faith has come, we're no longer under the schoolmaster. Very good. Or Jeremiah 31 and verse 31. Jeremiah, who was living under the law of Moses, says, "Behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel." And of course, this is quoted in Hebrews chapter 8. And the application is then made to Christ and to the new law, which he has ushered in. So Hebrews 9:7, Galatians 3:21, Jeremiah 31:31, Hebrews 8, all of these passages teach us that God did not intend the law of Moses to be permanent. The law of Moses did have a role. It had a significant role to play. But it played a role in preparing people for whom? The Christ who was to come. All right, that's where we wrap up this morning. We're on to Lesson 10 next Sunday. Appreciate your attention and participation this morning.